Some time back, I read an article that focused on a man by the name of Joel Tanis. Now, Joel Tanis got caught in what seemed like a never-ending line of cars at the Canadian-U.S. border. None of the cars were moving and hadn't moved for quite some time. Engines were turned off and people piled out of their car, and naturally they expressed their outrage and discontent. Now, Joel wanted to do something to change the mood. So he goes to the back of his vehicle, opens up the trunk, and he got out several bottles of bubbles. You remember those bubbles you got when you were a kid? You know, you not so big and blow them off? Well, he got several of those out. And he began blowing bubbles. And I'm sure people looked at him and thought, what an idiot. This guy's crazed. But he handed out some of the bottles to some of the other drivers close to him. And he was quoted as saying, soon, there are bubbles everywhere. Suddenly, people were happy. It's amazing what bubbles do for people. End quote. Well, the line didn't suddenly move any faster or the traffic jam broke up just like that. The collective attitude brightened considerably. There are a lot of challenging circumstances in life that try as we might, we simply cannot change. COVID-19, we can't change it. We're experiencing, the drain and strain of 8 months pretty much being locked up. However, what we can do is learn to develop an attitude that will allow us to handle life as joyfully as possible. To, in essence, to learn to see things with new eyes. John Lubbock, a noted British statesman who died in 1913, was quoted as having said, "What we see depends mainly on what we look for." Now, the Apostle Paul, on his part, in his letter to the church in Philippi, in essence, stated the same thing. When he wrote in chapter 4 and verse 8, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence and anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things." In other words, we need to learn how to look at things with new eyes. In his second letter to the church in Corinth, Paul challenged them with respect to the trials of life as being presented day by day. And imagine what we're dealing with, multiplied times and times and times again. And that's what the Corinthians are dealing with. But Paul writes, "Do not look at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." And that's in the 4th chapter and verse 18 of that second letter to the church in Corinth. An open-ended test for them to really open up and to see things through new eyes, to get a new perspective on all that is about. And a perspective of a spiritual nature with a defined focus on the God of heaven and the goal that waits for each and every one of us. Now, we've looked in other lessons at Philippians, the 3rd chapter, and verses 7 through 11. But I want to share with you 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 1. "For we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For indeed in this house we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven, inasmuch as we, having put on, shall not be found naked." Now verse 4. "For indeed while we are in this tent we groan, being burdened, because we do not want to be unclothed, but to be clothed, in order that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Now look at verse 5. Now he who prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave to us the Spirit as a pledge. We have a goal. We have something to, as we struggle through life day by day, we have something that allows us to see things with new eyes. In my bedroom, I've got a new pair of glasses. And I thought, oh, you know what I need to do? We're talking about new eyes, and I'll take off that pair and put on the new pair. And it takes much more than that. It takes an attitude looking at things totally different. Remember that quote mentioned a little while ago by John Lubbock? Now, I ask you, what is it that you look for in a spiritual sense? How do you see things? Have you gotten stuck and are not realizing much progress spiritually? Becoming more and more frustrated, like those mired down at the border, crossing in the example used at the beginning of this little short talk? Living in Southern California, traffic is a challenge. I've kind of looked at it as such because I say, okay, how can I beat this? What surface streets can I use to get around it? Many, many years ago, I held a gospel meeting in the Washington, D.C. area. And I was driving up there from South Carolina, where I was living at the time. And I was going up I-95 and got into Richmond, and the traffic started pressing in and got closer and closer to D.C. And it wasn't moving at all. And I'm thinking, man, I'm familiar with L.A. I'm familiar with Seattle. Terrible traffic there too. But nothing like D.C. The problem there was I didn't know the surface streets. I didn't know the feeder freeways that would come in and around, and I was left at their mercy. Eventually I got through it. It was frustrating, but it was all right. I'd resigned myself to the fact that I didn't know my way around. But a few months later I went back, same area, hold another meeting up in the general area again. Only this time, before I left, I took time to spy out options. And so I looked at things with new eyes. And as we look at life, life is a journey. And what we need to do is the exact same thing. We need to turn our eyes and plan ahead and say, when this happens, I'm not going to let it beat me. I'm not going to let it slow me down. I'm going to make the best of it, and I'm going to look for the positive, and I'm going to see everything with a totally different perspective. That's how we're going to do it in life. That's what the Scriptures call upon us to do in order to help us always to remain focused on what is to come. Notice Paul's letter to the church in Colossae, 3rd chapter, first 3 verses. Therefore, if you've been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things that are on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. You know, it's really an amazing thing what a focus on Christ can do for a person. No matter what we face, our mindset can be considerably brighter if we'll only take the time to begin to see things with new eyes and a new perspective.